Another night, another stretch of blacktop bleeding into the next. The hum of the tires on I-40 was my lullaby and my curse. I'd been running this route from Knoxville to the coast for more years than I cared to count. I knew every bump, every ghost of a pothole, every flickering sign for a truck stop that promised decent coffee and never delivered. This particular run was no different. The load was industrial machine parts, nothing special, and the deadline was tight but manageable. My mind was already at the motel in Wilmington, on that first shower and the bliss of a horizontal sleep. The cab of my old Peterbilt was my second home, smelling of stale coffee, worn leather, and the faint, ever-present scent of diesel. The landscape of North Carolina slid by my window, a dark tapestry of pine barrens and rolling hills swallowed by the night. My headlights cut a solitary path through the darkness, pushing back the void for just a second at a time. The radio had given up an hour ago, surrendering to static hiss, so it was just me, my thoughts, and the steady thrum of the engine. I passed the exit for some no-name town, the green sign a brief, ghostly apparition. I'd seen it 100 times. It marked the beginning of a long, lonely stretch of highway, one that always made the hairs on my arms stand up for no good reason. It was just a road, like any other, but it felt heavy. My eyes were starting to feel gritty. I reached for my thermos, shaking it to confirm the last, bitter dregs of coffee. It wasn't enough. I needed to push through for another hour before I could justify pulling over for a catnap. The white dashes of the lane divider began to blur into a solid line, a hypnosis tape on asphalt. I blinked hard, forcing myself to focus. It was then that I saw the first one. A flash of pure white in the ditch, just off the shoulder. A piece of litter, maybe. A plastic bag caught in the wind. But it was too still. I squinted, my tired brain trying to process it as the distance closed. It wasn't in the ditch. It was on the asphalt, right on the edge of the shoulder. A flower. A single, perfect white lily, looking as if it had been placed there by a careful hand. Its petals seemed to glow in the glare of my headlights. Weird. Who drops a single lily on a highway? I shrugged it off. A fluke. Something fell off a florist's truck. But a minute later, I saw another one, and then another. They were spaced about 50 yards apart, each one a stark, impossible beacon against the dark, unforgiving road. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. This was new. This wasn't on any of my previous trips. The rational part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive and sane on the road for 2 decades, was scrambling for an explanation, a prank, some kind of memorial. But it was the middle of the night, and these flowers looked fresh, pristine. They stood straight up, defying the wind wake of the passing trucks. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The tiredness was gone, replaced by a sharp, needle-like alertness. Something was wrong here. I slowed my rig down a notch, not enough to be dangerous, but enough to give me a better look. The flowers continued, a sporadic, macabre garden sprouting from the broken, oil-stained asphalt. They were unnervingly beautiful. Each blossom was a burst of purity in a landscape of grime and decay. I'd heard things, of course. You spend enough time in truck stops, you hear all the stories. Phantom hitchhikers, black-eyed children, ghost trains on abandoned tracks. I'd always dismissed them as the fantasies of lonely men with overactive imaginations. But this was tangible. I was seeing it with my own eyes. There was a story, a faint one, buried deep in my memory. Something a grizzled old-timer had mumbled over a plate of greasy eggs at a Waffle House outside of Raleigh. He talked about a stretch of road where flowers grew at night. A girl, a wedding, a crash. I'd nodded along, not really listening, more focused on the hot food. Now, his words came back to me with chilling clarity. My eyes flicked to the side mirror. The flowers I'd already passed were swallowed by the darkness, as if they'd never been. It was just my headlights illuminating the next one, and the next, a chain of white leading me forward. It felt like a trail, a bait. I turned the radio dial, desperate for any sound to break the spell. The static crackled and popped, and for a moment, I thought I heard something else. A faint, melodic hum, like a woman's voice singing a tune I almost recognized. It was gone as soon as I focused on it, lost in the electronic noise. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I was a grown man, a practical man. I fixed things with wrenches and duct tape. I didn't deal with this. A sign for a rest area appeared ahead. Relief flooded through me. A chance to get off this cursed stretch, to clear my head, to be around other people, even sleeping ones. I signaled and guided the big rig off the highway, the tires rumbling on the different texture of the access road. The rest area was nearly empty. One other truck was parked in the far corner, its cab dark. I pulled into a spot, killed the engine, and let the sudden, deafening silence press in on me. I could still see the highway from here. I stared at the shoulder, waiting. For what? I didn't know. For 10 minutes, nothing. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just fatigue. I was about to start the engine again, feeling foolish, when I saw it. A flicker of movement on the edge of the road. A shape, pale and indistinct, seemed to hover for a second where I'd last seen a lily. Then it was gone. A trick of the light. A cloud of exhaust from a car I hadn't seen. I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that the safe, predictable world of the highway had just cracked open. I sat in that rest area for a long time, my hands clenched on the wheel. The logical thing to do was to call it a night. Park here, sleep, and let the sunrise burn away this nonsense. But I had a schedule. More than that, I had my pride. Was I really going to let a few flowers spook me off the road? I started the engine. The deep, familiar roar was a comfort. I pulled back onto the highway, my resolve steeled. The flowers were still there. If anything, they seemed more numerous now, clustering closer to the white line, as if they were daring me to cross them. And then I saw it. One lily, larger and more vibrant than the others, was growing not on the shoulder, but right on the fog line, its stem seeming to push up through the solid paint and asphalt. It was an impossibility, a physical impossibility. My scientific mind, what little of it I had, short-circuited. I don't know what came over me, a compulsion, a need to prove to myself that this was real, that I wasn't losing my mind. I checked my mirrors. The road was empty in both directions for as far as I could see. I slowed the truck to a crawl, pulled onto the wide shoulder, and put on my hazards. The blinking orange light painted the scene in a rhythmic, hellish strobe. The air outside was cold and smelled of damp earth and pine, but underneath it was something else. The cloying, sweet scent of the lilac. It was overwhelming. I walked towards the one on the fog line, my boots crunching on the gravel. Each step felt heavy, like wading through water. I knelt down. The flower was perfect. Dew clung to its petals, though the night was dry. It had no business being here, yet it was more alive than any hothouse bloom I'd ever seen. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly. The story the old man told, the one I was now desperately trying to remember in full, whispered a warning in the back of my mind. But it was too late. I closed my fingers around the stem. It was cool and firm. I gave it a sharp tug. It didn't snap. It came free from the asphalt with a soft, sighing sound, as if the road itself had released it. I stood there, on the shoulder of I-40, holding a flower that had just grown out of solid pavement. It felt normal, just a flower. I looked at it in my hand, its whiteness almost blinding. There was no wilt, no blemish. I felt a strange sense of triumph. I had proof. I got back in the truck, placed the lily carefully on the passenger seat, and pulled back onto the road. For the next few miles, the flowers were gone. The shoulder was just a shoulder again. I had broken the spell. I had won. The weight in my stomach began to ease. It was just a flower. What harm could a flower do? The first hour was fine. Better than fine. I felt a surge of energy, a smug satisfaction at having faced down the unknown and come out on top. The lily lay on the seat beside me, a trophy. Its scent filled the cab, a pleasant, floral perfume that masked the smell of old coffee. I made good time, the miles melting away. The incident began to feel distant, like a strange dream. I even found a classic rock station that came in clear, and for a while, I was just a trucker on a long haul, singing along to songs I knew by heart. But as the night deepened, a subtle change began to occur. The flower wasn't just not wilting. It seemed to be getting brighter, its whiteness more intense. It started to feel like it was watching me. I'd glance over, and it would be just a flower, but in my peripheral vision, it seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. I tried to ignore it. I focused on the road, on the music, on anything but the lily. But it demanded attention. The sweet scent became cloying, thick. It started to smell less like a flower and more like a funeral parlor. The air in the cab grew heavy, difficult to breathe. I rolled down the window, letting in a blast of cold night air. It helped for a minute, but the scent of the lily clung, stubbornly refusing to be dissipated. It was as if it were woven into the very fabric of the seats, the air, my clothes. A sudden, irrational anger flared up in me. This was stupid. It was a plant. I snatched it from the seat, intending to hurl it out the window. But as my fingers touched the petals, they were ice cold. Unnaturally cold. A jolt, like a static shock but colder, shot up my arm. I dropped it on the floor mat. It landed with its blossom facing up, towards me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was accusing me. The story came back to me now, complete and horrifying. If you pick the flower, it won't wilt until you get into a crash. My mouth went dry. I was a careful driver. I had a perfect record. This was superstition, nothing more. But the fear was a live wire in my chest. I began to drive more cautiously, my knuckles white on the wheel. Every curve felt sharper, every shadow in the road looked like a deer about to leap out. The lily on the floor was no longer a trophy. It was a countdown timer, and I had no idea when it would hit 0. The next few hours were a special kind of hell. The flower on the floor was all I could think about. Every normal event of the highway became a potential trigger for a disaster. A car changing lanes too quickly made my heart seize. The gust of wind from a passing semi felt like a hand trying to push me off the road. I started seeing things. Not just the lily on the road, they had stopped appearing after I picked mine, but other things. A flicker of white in the woods. A woman's face, pale and sad, reflected for a split second in my rearview mirror. I jerked my head around, but there'd be nothing there. The radio began to act up again. The classic rock station dissolved, and that faint, melodic humming returned, clearer now. It was a bridal march. I was sure of it. The familiar, haunting tune played just beneath the static, a ghost song for a ghost bride. I slammed my hand on the radio, turning it off. The silence that followed was even worse. I was exhausted, but the terror was a potent fuel. Sleep was impossible. My eyes were glued to the road, scanning for threats. The lily on the floor seemed to be leaching the warmth from the cab. A deep, penetrating cold was setting in, starting from my feet and creeping upward. I thought about pulling over and throwing the flower away, but what if that made it worse? What if the curse, or whatever it was, required the flower to be with me? The logic of a nightmare had taken over. There were no good choices, only less bad ones. I passed a mile marker, and the numbers seemed to swim before my eyes. I was deep in the heart of the stretch now, the place where the old-timer had said the girl died. The air grew thick and still. The sound of my engine seemed muffled, as if I were driving through cotton. And then I saw her, up ahead, on the shoulder, a figure in a white dress. She was just standing there, her back to me, facing the woods. My blood turned to ice. I didn't want to get closer, but I couldn't stop. As my headlights washed over her, I saw the dress wasn't just white. It was a wedding gown, stained dark with dirt and something else at the hem. She held a bouquet of white lilies. I held my breath, waiting for her to turn, to show me her face. But she didn't. She simply wasn't there anymore. 1 second she was a solid form, the next, my lights illuminated empty asphalt. I hadn't even blinked. A violent shudder racked my body. I was no longer just scared. I was in the presence of something, and it knew I had taken its flower. Dawn was still hours away, a lifetime in the darkness. The flower on the floor was now visibly glowing, a soft, phosphorescent white that illuminated the footwell. The cold emanating from it was bone deep. I was shivering uncontrollably, my teeth chattering. My driving became erratic. I'd overcorrect a slight turn, or my speed would drift without me noticing. The line between reality and the nightmare was blurring. The road ahead would sometimes look wrong, the asphalt would seem to ripple, or the trees would lean in at impossible angles. I knew I was in no condition to drive. I was a hazard to myself and everyone else. But the thought of stopping, of being alone and stationary in this darkness with that thing in my cab, was even more terrifying. I was trapped in a steel box, hurtling through a haunted night. A fog began to rise from the ditches. It wasn't a natural fog. It was thick and white, and it carried the scent of lily, 1,000 times stronger. It curled across the road in tendrils, reducing my visibility to a few dozen feet. I was forced to slow to a crawl, my hazard lights back on, a beacon in a soupy, supernatural mist. Shapes moved in the fog. I saw the silhouette of the woman in the wedding dress, walking alongside the truck, keeping pace with me. I saw other, less distinct forms, shadows of sorrow and loss. This wasn't just one ghost. This was a place where pain had seeped into the very land, and I had disturbed it. The steering wheel grew icy under my hands. The windshield began to fog up on the inside, and with a creeping dread, I watched as a tracery of frost, in the pattern of lily petals, spread across the glass. I turned the defroster on full blast, but it did nothing against the supernatural cold. I was losing control. The truck felt heavier, sluggish, as if an invisible weight were bearing down on it. The engine whined in protest. I was at the end of my rope. This was it. The crash was coming. I could feel it building in the air, a terrible, final tension. I looked at the glowing flower on the floor, my death sentence, and I knew I was going to die on this cursed stretch of road, all because of a moment of stupid curiosity. I don't know how I made it through. The world dissolved into a blur of white fog, ghostly shapes, and sheer, pant-wetting terror. I just remember gripping the wheel, my eyes squeezed shut for a second, then snapping them open, over and over, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The fog lifted, the cold vanished, the oppressive weight was gone. The first faint hints of dawn were staining the eastern sky a pale, watery gray. I was still on I-40, driving at a normal speed. My knuckles were aching, and my entire body was trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. I looked down at the floor mat. The lily was gone. Not wilted, not decayed, just gone, as if it had never been there. The cloying scent had vanished, replaced by the familiar, comforting smell of my truck. I pulled over at the next available stop, a gas station that was just opening for the day. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs weak. The morning air was clean and cold and real. I filled up my tank with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, the mundane act of clicking the fuel nozzle a profound relief. I never finished that run. I called my dispatcher, told him I was sick, that it was non-negotiable. I found the closest, cheapest motel and slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, the world was normal. The sun was out. Cars were driving by. It felt like a reprieve. I still drive. It's all I know how to do. But I changed my route. I won't go near that stretch of I-40 in North Carolina anymore. I'll take a longer, slower, more expensive path every single time. Sometimes, when I'm on a long, dark night haul, I'll catch a glimpse of something white out of the corner of my eye, a piece of paper, a reflector, and my heart will skip a beat. I'll smell a faint trace of perfume from another truck stop waitress, and for a second, I'm back in that cab, frozen and terrified. I don't tell this story at the truck stops. They'd laugh, or worse, look at me with pity. But I know what I saw. I know what I took. That stretch of road is a grave, and the flowers are its markers. I picked one, and I paid for it with a piece of my sanity. I got off easy. The next driver might not be so lucky. All I know is you won't catch me stopping for nothing on that road ever again. Not for a flower, not for a hitchhiker, not for God himself. Some things are better left alone, growing in the dark.